Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a Navy veteran throws a graduation party for his son, he doesn't expect sheriff cruisers or war with the neighborhood HOA. But when a power-hungry HOA president crosses the line, she ignites a legal firestorm that will expose lies, shake a community, and crown an unlikely folk hero. The day started like a damn postcard. Clear skies, Colorado sun glinting off the new stain I'd just put on the deck, the smoker puffing away like an old friend. The flags were out, Navy and American, both flapping proudly at the entrance to my 3-acre slice of Stone Valley Estates. I'd spent weeks prepping the property, not because I had to impress anyone, but because my son Logan had just graduated top of his class in engineering from CU Boulder, and I'll be damned if I wasn't going to celebrate that like a king. We had tents set up along the gravel path, string lights I'd run myself over custom posts, speakers low enough not to bother the coyotes, and coolers packed with enough ribs, brisket, and beer to feed a battalion. Logan's friends from college were rolling in with their parents, and old neighbors brought folding chairs. Even a few of Logan's professors showed up. Nice folks, seemed a little stunned to be greeted with mesquite-smoked pork and Freebird playing softly in the background. I'd filed everything with the county, got the burn permit for the smoker, and the fireworks show scheduled for later. My buddy Cal from the sheriff's department even double-checked my noise levels just to be sure. Everything was legal, courteous, and celebratory, the way a good American backyard party should be. Around 4 in the afternoon, we hit full swing. Logan gave a short speech near the porch, getting a little choked up thanking his mother, God rest her soul, and the old man, me, for building everything with our hands. I won't lie, I felt that lump rise up behind my eyes, but I swallowed it. Down with a swig of amber and clapped that kid on the back like he'd just won a Nobel. I was carving brisket when I noticed 2 sheriff's cruisers crawling up my driveway. They didn't hit the sirens, didn't come in hot, more like they were rolling into a situation they weren't thrilled to be part of. The crowd quieted as the doors opened, and out stepped Deputy Hicks and some new face I didn't recognize. I set the knife down and wiped my hands on my apron, already feeling the air shift around me. "Mr. Jensen," Hicks said, nodding with the awkwardness of someone interrupting something sacred. "We got a complaint about an unregistered gathering. Noise levels, possibly unlicensed outdoor equipment." "You've got to be kidding me," I said flatly. "Everything here's by the book. Permits, decibel readings, even the fireworks are scheduled and filed. You want to see the paperwork?" "I got it in the house." Hicks scratched his chin, the new guy watching the crowd like we were about to start throwing beer bottles. "Mind if we take a quick look around? Just procedure." I nodded stiffly and motioned toward the deck. The guests stood frozen, like someone had just pissed in the baptismal. Logan looked like someone slapped him. They walked the perimeter. No violations, no open flames outside the pit. Music well under city ordinance levels. Everything was clean. Still, they handed me a written warning, said they had to. Complaint was filed formally through a community enforcement tip line. I didn't have to ask who did it. There was only one person in the zip code who had a problem with other people being happy within visual range of her fortress of misery. Karen Blandford, president for life of the Stone Valley Estates HOA, which, and I say this with emphasis, I am not a member of. See, when I bought this property 15 years ago, I made damn sure it wasn't under HOA jurisdiction. I wanted land, autonomy, room to breathe and build without some polyester tyrant telling me what shade of beige my porch needed to be. Karen's domain begins at the edge of my fence and ends where mine begins. That line's been clear for a decade and a half. Didn't matter today, though. The cruisers pulled away. The guests tried to shake it off, but the vibe was gone. Some parents left early. Others made excuses. Logan's smile had disappeared somewhere between the smoker and the warning ticket. He didn't say much. Didn't have to. I could see it in his face. His big day. Tainted. As the sun dipped behind the hills, I walked the yard, picking up half-empty Solo cups and plates with untouched burgers. The string lights buzzed overhead, like they were trying to fill the silence. I poured out the leftover lemonade and dumped the last of the brisket in a tray for the dogs. Then my neighbor Clint texted me a screenshot. It was an email from Karen to the HOA mailing list. "It's disappointing to see some residents treat our peaceful neighborhood like a carnival. Our standards must be preserved. Let's set a higher bar for community conduct. No exceptions." I stared at the screen long enough for the battery to die in my hand. That's when I stopped being disappointed and started getting angry. I didn't sleep that night, not because of the police, not even because of the ruined celebration. It was the damned smugness in Karen Blanford's email that crawled under my skin and nested there like a tick. Let's set a higher bar for community conduct. I could hear her voice in those words, that syrupy tone she uses in HOA meetings, acting like she's chairing the damn United Nations while deciding what shade of mulch is acceptable for flower beds. By sunrise, I was sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of black coffee, my deed papers, and the original property purchase agreement spread out in front of me like battle plans. My land wasn't just outside the HOA, it was legally irrevocably excluded. The purchase contract from 15 years ago had a signed acknowledgement from the county zoning office confirming that my parcel was never annexed into Stone Valley Estates. I'd insisted on it. I didn't spend half my life in the Navy protecting American rights just to move into a neighborhood that handed them over to a woman with a clipboard and too much free time. Around 7, I called Marcy Sanders, my lawyer, former client, and poker night regular. She picked up on the second ring, and I didn't even have to explain much. I just said, Karen Blanford called the cops on my son's graduation party. It's time to go nuclear. By 10, Marcy had already drafted an official notice addressed to the Stone Valley Estates HOA and their board, a cease and desist regarding further interference in any activities on my property, accompanied by a formal request for the HOA to provide the basis for their claim of jurisdiction, if such a claim existed. We both knew it didn't. That same morning, I called Joe Ellison, one of my old Navy buddies who now worked in the city manager's office. Joe was the kind of guy who could track property records, development plans, and backdoor politics before breakfast. I told him what happened, and he let out a whistle. Rick, he said, you're not the only one. HOA's been getting real bold lately. I've had a few quiet complaints from other folks about them stepping over lines they legally can't cross. He promised to dig. By noon, he texted me a PDF. It was a copy of a complaint filed 2 months earlier by another neighbor, a family whose toddler's birthday party had been shut down by HOA board members showing up in person with printed bylaws and threats of code enforcement. Their house, also not under HOA jurisdiction, Karen had insisted it was technically included in the expanded boundary lines. That phrase stuck with me. Technically included. I spent the next few hours walking the boundary of my property, snapping photos. Karen's lot was 2 parcels over, but her backyard fence faced mine. Along that fence was a series of signs, HOA property, no access beyond this point, and a brand new camera post pointed directly at my side. I hadn't noticed it before, but it looked freshly installed. Classy. By mid-afternoon, Marcy emailed the official letter to the HOA board and CC'd the county council. Just for fun, I also forwarded it to the Stone Valley Estates neighborhood email list with a note. This is what happens when self-appointed tyrants cross the line. My land is not under HOA control. Next time, knock on my door before calling the cops. That alone would have been enough, but Karen didn't know how to back off. The very next day, I got a letter, not from the HOA, from the Stone Valley Community Enforcement Committee. It was some unofficial group name they apparently cooked up to make their threats sound more bureaucratic. The letter accused me of holding an unsanctioned public event, creating undue noise pollution, and, I kid you not, operating commercial-level cooking equipment without a vendor's license. It read like it was written by a substitute librarian. With a God complex, Marcy laughed when she saw it. They're trying to build a case, she said. Not a legal one, a political one. Pressure you into compliance, maybe even discredit you with the council. She was right. I could feel it. Karen was ramping up, and I had no doubt she was rallying her little army of clipboard commandos to paint me as the neighborhood menace. So I decided to flip the script. I started visiting my neighbors, not just the ones I knew, everyone. Went door to door with a copy of my deed and a calm explanation of what happened. I wasn't yelling. I wasn't threatening, just laying it out plainly. And something interesting happened. They started talking. One woman admitted that HOA fined her $500 last summer for putting up string lights that weren't aesthetically uniform. Another neighbor got a notice for his teenage son parking his beat-up Jeep on the driveway instead of inside the garage. One guy, an old contractor named Lester, showed me a stack of letters going back 4 years, each more ridiculous than the last, One of them cited him for unapproved lawn statuary. HOA, it turned out, had been creeping beyond their borders for years. I called Joe again. "Joe, you ever seen maps of Stone Valley's official jurisdiction?" "Sure," he said. "They're public. But there's something weird. I've seen two versions float around. One's the certified boundary map. The other has a few extra lots added in pencil, never officially adopted." I froze. Mine, yours, and 3 others. They've been using it to justify enforcement complaints. That's when I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. This was a pattern, and Karen had just picked the wrong damn neighbor to push. By the end of the week, I wasn't the only one with a bone to pick. Turns out, once one neighbor stands up and says, "Hey, this is bullshit," it gives everyone else permission to stop pretending they enjoy being steamrolled. I had over a dozen conversations in less than 3 days. People who'd stayed quiet for years were suddenly offering copies of letters, fines, even internal HOA emails that mysteriously found their way into my inbox. Someone, I never learned who, slipped an envelope under my gate containing a printed HOA meeting agenda with the phrase "Boundary Compliance Expansion Strategy" circled in red. It was time to escalate. Marcy filed the civil suit on a Monday morning. The claim was clear: harassment, defamation, and willful interference in a lawful private event. We asked for $250,000 in damages, $100 for the direct disruption of my son's graduation party, $50 for emotional distress, and the rest for reputational harm and punitive compensation. But that wasn't all. We also filed a secondary motion with the Douglas County Council requesting a formal review of Stone Valley Estates HOA's enforcement practices, with a special focus on jurisdictional overreach and misuse of law enforcement channels. I wasn't just trying to win. I was trying to draw a line in the dirt big enough for a damn satellite to see it. The local paper picked up the story by Thursday. The headline was modest. "Man claims HOA harassed him during son's graduation party," but the reaction online wasn't. Comments exploded. Dozens of residents from nearby towns shared their own HOA horror stories. The HOA board tried to stay quiet, but the pressure was building, especially on Karen. So what does a tyrant do when cornered? She reaches for a fake olive branch. I got a call late one night from a woman who introduced herself as Karen's lawyer. She used that overly sweet tone attorneys use when they're trying to convince you you've misunderstood your own trauma. "Mr. Jensen, my client regrets any distress caused. We believe this entire matter is the result of a regrettable miscommunication, and we're hoping to resolve it quickly and amicably. If you're willing to retract the civil suit and related public accusations, my client is prepared to offer a settlement." I let her finish. Then I laughed. "Ma'am," I said, "your client sent armed officers to my house, scared children and grandparents off my lawn, tried to humiliate my family, and followed it up with a smear campaign. There is no settlement. I'm not here to de-escalate. I'm here to finish it." Silence. "Have a nice night," I added, and hung up. The next day, HOA released a community-wide email that read like a corporate press release written in panic. "We're aware of recent unfortunate misunderstandings. Stone Valley Estates HOA remains committed to community standards, respect, and neighborly goodwill." It was followed by a bullet point list of event planning guidelines, none of which applied to me, because, again, I'm not in their HOA. Marcy and I weren't done. She filed a motion for preliminary injunction, a legal request to bar Stone Valley HOA from initiating any further enforcement or communication regarding my property under penalty of contempt. We included the cease and desist letter, the bogus enforcement committee complaint, and my neighbor's email showing Karen bragging about getting the county to show up fast on Saturday. But we needed something bigger, something undeniable. That's when Joe called me back. "Rick," he said, "you're going to want to see this." He dug deeper into the zoning board archives and found 2 completely different maps filed under the same HOA name. One, the legally adopted version, clearly excluded my parcel. The second, submitted quietly with a boundary adjustment proposal that was never approved, included mine and 3 others. That second version was used as evidence in multiple complaints to the sheriff's office and local code enforcement. In short, fraud. HOA was enforcing policies on land it didn't legally control, using falsified maps, and no one had caught it or bothered to challenge it until now. Marcy's eyes lit up like a kid at a candy store when I showed her. "This isn't just civil," she said. "This is criminal. misrepresentation of jurisdiction, document falsification, unlawful governance. They're done. But I wasn't smiling yet, because I knew Karen. She'd spent years building her little paper empire. She had contacts, influence, and no shortage of people terrified to cross her. Taking her down wouldn't just require evidence. It would take a damn bulldozer. So I put one in motion, literally. I brought my backhoe from the construction yard, rolled it up to my property line next to her fence, and parked it in full view of her breakfast nook. Then I erected a 20-foot vinyl banner on steel posts that read, "This land is not under HOA control. Read the deed." Clint, my neighbor across the road, brought lawn chairs and beer. We sat under the banner for 2 hours that afternoon, waving to passing cars. By evening, a drone was circling overhead. I waved to that too. 2 days later, I got a visit. Not from Karen, from a journalist from the Denver Times. He introduced himself, asked if I had time to talk. I said, "So, buddy, I've been waiting 15 years for someone to ask the right question." When the Denver Times article dropped, it hit like a small detonation. The headline was blunt. Local HOA accused of falsifying documents, targeting non-member homeowner. Right beneath it was a photo of me, standing in front of my giant not under HOA control banner, arms folded, with the sunrise hitting the backhoe. Behind me like a war machine. Dramatic? Sure. Effective? Damn right. The story outlined everything. The party, the bogus sheriff visit, the duplicate boundary maps, the cease and desist. Karen's name was all over it. So was mine. I braced for backlash. What I didn't expect was the flood of messages. Email, Facebook, even a couple handwritten letters dropped into my mailbox. Homeowners from across the state, some from other states entirely, thanking me for standing up, sharing their own horror stories. HOA fined me $500 for a garden gnome. They towed my daughter's car from my driveway. They tried to evict my mother for having wind chimes. It was surreal. I was suddenly some kind of anti-HOA folk hero. And I didn't ask for that. But I sure as hell wasn't going to waste it. Marcy and I decided to go on the offensive. It wasn't enough to win in court. We had to make sure Karen couldn't wriggle out with a PR pivot and a quietly signed check. She needed to be publicly, legally, and permanently exposed. So I started talking. On radio. Podcasts. I even did a segment with a local news station, walking the reporter through my deed, the legal HOA boundary lines, and the fraudulent map versions. The cameraman filmed the exact spot where the real border ran. The one Karen had tried to pretend didn't exist. Meanwhile, Joe, my surveyor friend, brought in an ace, a licensed geodetic engineer from the state registry. She reviewed both maps and issued a notarized statement confirming that the second map not only violated survey standards, but had never been legally recorded. Worse, the second map contained digital signature metadata that didn't match the original file date. Someone had altered it after the fact and tried to pass it off as official. That's when the case went nuclear. Marcy filed an amended complaint, now alleging fraudulent misrepresentation, document tampering, and attempted unlawful governance. We were no longer talking about a civil nuisance. We were talking about felony-level offenses. And Karen. She did what all cornered authoritarians do. She retaliated. It started small. Someone dumped a bag of nails in my driveway. Then my mailbox was smashed with a bat. One night, I came home to find a handwritten note duct taped to my gate. "We don't need your kind in this neighborhood." But the dumbest move, the one that guaranteed her downfall, came a week later when two men in yellow vests showed up on my land claiming to be HOA inspectors. They had clipboards, walkie-talkies, and a printed badge with a fake seal. They were photographing my barn, measuring my deck, and trying to look official. I didn't recognize either of them. I didn't have to, because I'd installed motion sensor cameras all over the property the week before. High-end models with facial recognition and real-time alerts. I walked up slow, coffee in hand, and asked, "Can I help you boys with something?" One of them blinked. "Routine compliance inspection, sir. HOA has received multiple complaints about unauthorized modifications to—" "Wrong answer," I cut in. "This land isn't under HOA jurisdiction. That's been established. And if you so much as scratch my gravel, I'll have you charged with trespassing." The shorter guy looked nervous. The taller one tried to bluff. "We have authority to assess." I pointed behind me. Sheriff Hicks's cruiser was pulling up the driveway. See, I'd already called him. The men were escorted off the property. Turns out they were not licensed inspectors. One was Karen's nephew. The other worked part-time at a hardware store. Both were trying to play compliance officer on land they had zero legal right to step foot on. We pressed charges for trespass and impersonation. Hicks didn't even hesitate. The next day, a subpoena was issued for Karen Blanford, requiring her to appear in court and provide testimony regarding the fraudulent maps and the impersonation incident. Marcy served it personally, with a grin that could slice through drywall. And me? I installed 2 more cameras, bought extra batteries, and poured myself a drink. Because this war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. Sitting in that courtroom, watching Karen walk through the double doors with her perfectly ironed blazer and that signature smug tilt of her chin, I'll admit, I almost cracked a smile. Not out of joy, out of disbelief that it had actually come to this. Months ago, I was just trying to throw a party for my kid. Now, I was sitting behind a legal team while the president of the HOA, who had tried to bulldoze my rights, my land, and my name, was about to testify under oath in a courtroom filled with cameras and court reporters. And Buddy. She looked pissed about it. Marcy leaned over and whispered, she thought this would go away. She thought she could paper over it like everything else. Let's make sure she doesn't forget today. Karen's lawyer was some slick, out-of-town suit who probably thought this was going to be a cakewalk. He objected to nearly everything. Irrelevant, leading, speculative. But the judge, a no-nonsense woman named Holloway, was clearly not in the mood for games. She overruled most of his objections with surgical precision and gave Karen a look during opening statements that said, "You better not waste my time." Marcy opened by laying out the timeline. The fake inspection, the 2 conflicting maps, the police involvement, the fraudulent boundary expansion, the trespass, all of it. Then she introduced the forensic metadata report from Joe and the state engineer's sworn affidavit. It was bulletproof. Karen was called to the stand on day 2. She took the oath with that artificial politeness she always wore like makeup, just thick enough to hide the contempt underneath. At first, she tried to play the victim. She claimed she was just doing her duty, acting on resident complaints, deeply regretful if Mr. Jensen felt unfairly treated. She even tried to suggest I had orchestrated the whole media frenzy for attention. Marcy didn't even blink. Mrs. Blanford, can you explain how a boundary map, submitted under your name, ended up with digitally altered metadata and conflicting plot lines? Karen shifted. I don't recall the exact submission process. These things are often handled by committee. Yet this map was submitted with your personal digital signature and account credentials from the HOA's official filing system. I would have to consult with our records. Would those records include your email to Mr. Jeffries, the HOA vice president, where you stated, and I quote, "The sheriff showed up on Saturday, told you I could make it happen"? Her face froze. The courtroom did not. There was an audible shift. That little wave of reaction when people realize they're not just watching a petty dispute. They're watching a cover-up unravel in real time. Marcy continued, walking Karen through each element of the fraud. The fake inspectors, the phone calls, the cease and desist letter, the video footage of the men on my land, the notarized survey reports. The kicker was a printed HOA newsletter from 2 years ago where Karen had written about strategic jurisdictional alignment, which Marcy translated to great effect as property expansion without consent. Then came the cross-examination. Karen's lawyer tried to turn it around. Mr. Jensen, is it not true you once referred to the HOA as a legal cult with clipboards? I did, I replied, and I stand by that. Some laughter rippled through the gallery. Would you describe yourself as hostile toward authority? No, just allergic to fake authority. The judge didn't smile, but she didn't object either. That afternoon, the county recorder took the stand and confirmed the official boundaries of Stone Valley Estates, and that my parcel was not and had never been part of the HOA. Ever. He even brought the original hand-signed subdivision deed from the 90s, showing clearly where their jurisdiction ended. By day 3, the tone had shifted. No one in that courtroom, jury included, had any doubt that Karen had knowingly falsified documents, orchestrated a harassment campaign, and tried to absorb private property into her little empire with a smile and a forged map. And when the judge asked her directly, "Do you believe you had the legal authority to act on Mr. Jensen's property?" Karen hesitated, just a second too long. "No," she said at last, barely audible. That moment, that was the crack. The hairline fracture in her armor, and I knew we were going to split it wide open. The sixth day of trial opened with a storm outside and tension thick enough inside to cut with a butter knife. Reporters had started arriving early. A guy from the state news outlet brought a camera crew. Karen showed up in a different outfit, softer colors, less ironed, her hair not quite as defiant as before. She looked smaller, not humbled, just cornered. And then came the final blow. The prosecution brought in a forensic tech. Young guy, nerdy, probably the kind of person Karen wouldn't have noticed in real life unless he was holding a clipboard and a penalty fine. He explained step by step how the altered map files had been traced back to a specific user account within the HOA database, an account with Karen's credentials. Not just her name, but her IP address, her device ID, and even timestamps that matched the day after the party. Then they presented the kicker, a voice memo. Someone, likely an HOA board member who'd flipped sides, had turned over a recording from a meeting. In it, Karen could be heard saying, "Rick thinks he's clever. Let him throw his tantrum. We'll have that property under compliance by the end of summer. He'll either pay or move." The audio played twice. The courtroom was silent both times. Karen's lawyer turned pale. The jury didn't need to be told what to feel. It was all over their faces. Some were shaking their heads. One woman just closed her eyes like she'd heard enough. Marcy stood like a statue through the whole thing. And me? I stared at Karen. She looked at the table. Judge Holloway called a recess, but not before announcing that closing arguments would begin tomorrow. The implication was clear. There wasn't much left to argue. Outside the courtroom, things had taken on a strange energy. I couldn't walk 5 feet without someone from the press trying to shove a mic in my face. "Mr. Jensen, how does it feel to bring down an HOA president? Do you plan to countersue? What's next for you?" I just smiled and said I'd speak when it was over. That night, I got a knock at my door. It wasn't Marcy, wasn't the sheriff, wasn't even a reporter. It was Greg, one of the old-timers who'd lived 2 houses down from Karen for over 15 years. He was holding a sealed manila envelope and wearing an expression I couldn't quite read. "She gave this to me years ago," he said. Said to hold it in case she ever lost control of the board. I think now qualifies. Inside the envelope were internal HOA memos, old complaints from residents about Karen's behavior that had mysteriously gone missing, and, most damning, a signed letter from her dated 3 years prior requesting authorization to explore annexation options for undeveloped plots beyond the HOA's eastern boundary. That eastern boundary, my land. She'd been planning this for years. Marcy was thrilled. "This solidifies intent," she said. "We're not just talking fraud now. We're talking premeditated abuse of power." The next morning, Karen didn't show up on time. When she finally did, she was escorted in, not by her lawyer, but by 2 county deputies. Word traveled fast. A warrant had been issued for obstruction and destruction of public records based on new evidence submitted overnight. Apparently, someone had caught her trying to shred a box of HOA documents in her garage at 2 in the morning. The neighbor had filmed it. It was over. Not officially, not yet, but everyone knew. The judge postponed closing arguments until Karen's criminal arraignment could be scheduled. The civil case would resume after that, but I didn't need a verdict to know we'd won. When Karen was walked out of that courthouse in cuffs, trying to shield her face from cameras and reporters shouting her name, it wasn't just a win for me. It was a warning flare to every other petty tyrant hiding behind fake HOA power and forged maps. I went home that day, poured myself a drink, and sat on the porch as the sun went down behind my barn. It was still my barn, still my land, still mine. For the first time in months, my house was quiet. Not courtroom quiet, not tension quiet, real quiet. The kind that only settles in after a long, ugly fight. I sat in my kitchen that morning staring at the same cup of coffee for over an hour, steam long gone. The headlines were already circulating. HOA president indicted after fraud scandal. Karen Blanford faces multiple felony charges. Stone Valley power grab exposed. I didn't smile reading them. I didn't cheer. I just felt still. But the war wasn't quite over. See, even after Karen was arrested and the judge delayed the civil verdict, the board, what remained of it, tried to regroup. Greg, the old neighbor who'd handed me that envelope, told me they'd called an emergency HOA meeting. Apparently, some of the members were trying to distance themselves from Karen, claiming they had no knowledge of her actions and that she'd acted unilaterally. A classic shuffle to save face. But then the subpoenas started flying. The county prosecutor, now that Karen's arrest had opened the door, issued demands for all HOA communications, meeting records, archived emails, and financial logs. Turns out HOA money had been used to hire those fake inspectors to create the forged map and to fund surveillance on my property. All of that was about to come out. Meanwhile, Marcy and I filed a countersuit. It wasn't just about trespass anymore. It was civil fraud, defamation, emotional distress, and an injunction to permanently bar the HOA from contacting me, entering my land, or making any claim on my property ever again. We added in damages for the party disruption, the police confrontation, and the months of legal warfare they'd dragged me through. Marcy didn't skimp. "You've got them cornered," she said. "Now you hit them where it hurts." The wallet. The press kept circling. Local outlets ran exposés on other HOA overreaches across the county. One journalist even uncovered a pattern. Karen had tried to push similar expansions twice before, but had been voted down internally. Both times, she quietly reshaped HOA policies behind the scenes. This time was just the first time someone fought back loud enough. And it turned out, I wasn't alone. People from all over the state started reaching out. I got emails from property owners who'd been harassed, fined, and even fenced in by overreaching HOAs. A retired Army colonel in New Mexico, a widowed farmer in Oregon, a single mom in Colorado. All of them told me versions of the same thing. They thought I didn't have the strength to fight them. I started answering every single one. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just my fight anymore. What Karen tried to do to me wasn't unique. It was just exposed, and maybe that made it valuable. Then came a knock. This time it was Sheriff Martinez. He tipped his hat and held out a small envelope, certified mail. "It's official," he said. "Civil court reconvenes in 10 days. They'll be issuing final rulings. Sounds like your attorney's already prepping closing arguments." I nodded, heart steady. Let's finish it." But before he turned to leave, he added something that stuck with me. "You know," he said, "I've seen folks lose their land to banks, to families, to fire, but almost never to bullies in khakis and HOA polos. You stood your ground, Jensen. You made it count." I watched him drive off, dust curling behind his cruiser. Then I looked out at my land, the same land I'd fought for, bled for, defended in court, and reclaimed from the clutches of a power-hungry president. It wasn't over yet, but I was ready. The courtroom on the final day was quieter than before, not in tension, but in tone. Most of the reporters had moved on. Only a few stragglers remained, scribbling notes, waiting for a verdict that everyone already saw coming. Karen wasn't there. Her arraignment was scheduled for the following month, and her bail conditions barred her from attending civil proceedings. Her lawyer looked like a man who'd already started updating his resume. Marcy stood tall as she delivered our closing. She didn't raise her voice, didn't dramatize. She laid it all out like a stone path through a minefield. Every forgery, every false inspection, every inch of surveillance footage and document trail that tied the HOA to Karen's campaign. She ended with one sentence. Mr. Jensen never sought conflict. He sought peace. And when his rights were challenged, he responded not with violence, but with truth. And the truth, Your Honor, is undeniable. The HOA's remaining attorney tried to do damage control, spinning Karen as a rogue actor and painting the rest of the board as uninformed, misled. But by that point, it was like trying to mop up a flood. With a napkin, Judge Holloway didn't take long. She ruled that the HOA had willfully and knowingly engaged in fraudulent acts, that they had conspired to unlawfully annex private land, and that my property was, quote, free and forever independent of any and all HOA jurisdiction, now or in perpetuity. I think my lungs didn't register air for a good 10 seconds. But then came the best part. The court awarded me damages, not a symbolic sum, not a handshake and good luck, but a real, heavy, jaw-dropping judgment. Enough to pay off the court costs, repair the surveillance damage, compensate for legal stress, and then some. Enough to make even the quietest HOA treasurer wake up in a cold sweat. But Judge Holloway wasn't finished. She ordered that the Stone Valley HOA dissolve its current board within 90 days and undergo state-supervised reformation. That meant fresh elections, outside audits, and a freeze on all enforcement actions until the mess was cleaned up. That right there was justice with teeth. Outside, I didn't give a press conference, didn't wave a flag. I just shook Marcy's hand and thanked her, sincerely. She said she'd see me at the land office next week to file the final cleanup paperwork. I drove home slowly, no music, just tires on pavement and windows down. When I reached the top of the ridge where my land opened out, I parked the truck and got out. It was late afternoon, the sun bleeding gold through the trees. My barn stood where it always had. The grass was high again, wild and unapologetic. My house looked exactly as I'd left it. Mine, lived in, real. No fences had been moved, no signs had been staked, no compliance warnings taped to my porch. I stepped onto my porch and sat in that same chair where I'd once read those first fake letters and fought back the heat of indignation. And for the first time in all those months, I let myself relax. Not just because the court said I was right, but because I had stood up, not just for myself, but for everyone who'd ever been bulldozed by someone in a cheap suit and a fake badge. That night, I grilled steaks for dinner, drank a cold beer. I got one last letter in the mail the next morning. It was from Greg, handwritten, no return address. Just 4 words inside. Still your land, neighbor? I folded it, smiled, slipped it in my jacket pocket, and walked back outside into the wind.